They thought they could control Canada with tariffs. They thought Mark Carney would fold. But on July 21st, the tables turned and Donald Trump's 70% tariff gamble may have just detonated in his own backyard. While fireworks lit up the skies over Washington this 4th of July, President Trump was not just celebrating independence. He was declaring war, a trade war. In a televised address from the White House, he threatened a sweeping wave of tariffs ranging from 10% to a jaw-dropping 70% on countries that refused to sign patriotic trade deals before August. At the top of his hit list, Canada, longtime ally, economic twin, neighbor, target. "This will be my greatest victory yet," Trump bellowed in Iowa, moments before signing what he called a big, beautiful law. The crowd roared, the markets shook. But 500 miles north, inside the quiet corridors of Ottawa's parliament, another kind of war was already unfolding. A war of patience, calculation, and legal precision led not by a showman, but by a banker. Mark Carney, the newly elected Prime Minister of Canada and former Governor of the Bank of England, did not fire back on Twitter. He did not stage press spectacles. Instead, he unleashed a quiet, calculated economic counteroffensive that is now being called a masterclass in geopolitical judo. According to internal U.S. trade estimates, if Trump's tariffs were fully implemented, Canada could lose over $62 billion in the steel, aluminum, and automotive sectors. Devastating. But what Trump did not anticipate was that the first punch would come not from a factory floor, but from a 3% digital services tax. Just hours before Trump's tariff plan was to take effect, Carney suddenly withdrew the controversial Canadian tax targeting tech giants like Amazon and Google. The U.S. took it as a sign of retreat. They were wrong. "This is not a concession," Carney clarified in a press conference on July 1st. "It is bait and Washington bit." Meanwhile, unlike the UK and Vietnam, who quickly signed many deals to dodge Trump's wrath, Canada refused to blink. No rushed agreements, no photo ops. Instead, Ottawa buried the U.S. delegation in procedural delays, postponed meetings, and complex legal annexes. Behind the scenes, Carney's team forced American negotiators to reveal their most aggressive demands: electric vehicle quotas, battery material controls, and more. And yet, while Trump flooded headlines with proclamations of victory in Britain and Hanoi, experts like Rachel Marlowe at the University of Toronto saw through it. These so-called wins represent less than 1% of total U.S. imports, she noted. The real fight is still behind closed doors with Canada. And at the heart of that fight is milk. Yes, milk. Because in Canada, dairy is not just a supermarket item, it is political dynamite. Behind its simple white carton lies a fortress of supply management, 300% import tariffs, strict quotas, and over 339,000 jobs, most in Ontario and Quebec. And here is the shocker. Surrendering on dairy would cost Carney the next election, so instead he drew a red line permanently. On August 8th, just before Parliament recessed, Canada passed Bill C-98 unanimously. Not a single dissenting voice. The legislation, dubbed the Supply Management Shield, legally bars any Canadian minister from negotiating dairy quotas or tariff reductions without explicit parliamentary approval. The Senate fast-tracked it. Carney stood before lawmakers and made it crystal clear: we will not trade our farmers' livelihoods, not for tariffs, not for deadlines, not for optics. The message reached Washington loud and clear, and it was not well received. Trump erupted on Truth Social, labeling Canada's dairy system a protectionist prison and demanding Ottawa open 15% of its market or face severe punitive escalation. But Carney had anticipated this rage. Even before Trump could pull the tariff trigger, Ottawa released an economic impact study that warned dismantling Canada's dairy quota system would tank milk prices by up to 25%, eliminate over $6 billion in farm value, and threaten more than 72,000 jobs in Quebec and Toronto's food processing sectors. Sylvia Poor, spokeswoman for Dairy Farmers of Canada, did not mince words. When America targets our milk, they are not just touching breakfast, they are touching our federal charter. Across rural districts, campaign billboards lit up with a stark warning: hands off our milk. What had once been an innocuous grocery staple had now become a line in the national sand. Carney had drawn it with permanent ink. Trump may view tariffs as a weapon of dominance, but his 70% hammer now threatens to boomerang and hit the U.S. square in its industrial gut. The steel-aluminum auto triangle connecting Windsor, Detroit, and Oshawa is one of the most deeply integrated manufacturing ecosystems on Earth. U.S. automakers depend on cross-border components that may travel back and forth 6 times before a single car reaches a dealership. Disrupting this flow is not just reckless, it is economic sabotage. By early July, even before formal tariffs kicked in, the market was already reacting. Hot-rolled steel prices in the Midwest surged 22% in 30 days. Construction firms froze projects. Manufacturers delayed orders. In Oshawa, General Motors cut an entire shift, laying off 700 workers. Stellantis postponed its flagship Daytona RT release, citing unpredictable tariff exposure. In Michigan, behind closed legislative doors, economist Melissa Grant from the Great Lakes Economic Council delivered a dire warning. If this 70% tariff hits, we lose 13,000 jobs in the Midwest over 5 years and $450 million in state revenue. And that is just the beginning. In response, Canada unveiled a $6.5 billion trade defense. E-fund, not symbolic surgical. $4 billion went straight to the Ontario-Quebec Battery Corridor to shield 30,000 factory workers. $1 billion more supported agri-food sectors, and $500 million in concessional loans helped manufacturers stay afloat. But Carney was not stopping at defense. He turned Canada outward. On July 10th, Ottawa kickstarted free trade talks with ASEAN. Conversations resumed with Japan over steel quotas. And in Brussels, a deal emerged to increase Canadian steel exports to the EU by 15%, preemptively softening the blow of U.S. tariffs before they even landed. Back home, Ottawa launched Diversify 2025, a rapid response policy enabling Canadian businesses to reroute exports from the U.S. to Europe and Asia within weeks. Key components from Southeast Asia would now enter Canada tariff-free under new trade frameworks. The Canadian dollar dipped slightly down 1.4%, but investor confidence surged. Rio Tinto Canada's stock jumped buoyed by federal backing of the aluminum sector. Even labor unions took notice. Lana Dubois of Unifor Canada's largest private sector union told CBC, "This is the first time in years we have seen a federal plan that is not just reactive, it is predictive. If the U.S. pulls the trigger, we will not blink." Carney was not just defending Canada, he was repositioning it. The message was unmistakable. Canada will not beg for access to markets, it will build its own. And in Washington, the narrative was cracking. Inside the White House, officials began to ask a troubling question, not if tariffs would hurt, but who they would hurt more. And the answers were not pretty. Politically, Trump was boxed in. Backing down would look weak to his base in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Ohio. But escalation could torpedo the Midwest, Detroit's jobs, consumer prices, and billionaire donors' confidence. On July 15th, Trump escalated anyway. In a bombastic Truth Social post, he extended the tariff threats to Canadian beef, softwood, lumber, and even pharmaceuticals. The rhetoric shifted from trade to nationalism. "We are defending American families from foreign cartels," he declared. But behind the patriotic veneer lurked economic peril. According to the Georgetown Policy Group, U.S. pharmaceutical input costs could rise by $2 billion under Canadian tariffs right before the election. Ottawa read the desperation like a textbook. The Foreign Affairs Ministry immediately activated back-channel negotiations with EU and Asian embassies to fast-track quota conversions in sectors likely to be hit next by Trump's wrath. Canada was not reacting, it was preparing for the second wave before the first even landed. In Michigan, meanwhile, the political tremors hit home. In a private strategy meeting, Republican State Senator Tom Reed reportedly told colleagues, "We hand out America First stickers, while Trump hands out pink slips," and the data backed him up. A report from the Center for Automotive Research predicted a 70% tariff could wipe out 45,000 jobs across the Windsor, Detroit, Oshawa triangle in 3 quarters, pushing Ontario into recession and shutting down Michigan assembly lines. Trump's own allies were sounding the alarm. A leaked Bloomberg memo from GM executives warned the White House, "The industry is nearing a breaking point. Optics cannot replace supply chain stability." But while Trump shouted, Carney waited, and that paradoxically is what unsettled Washington the most. As July 21st neared the administration's self-imposed tariff deadline, Canada maintained radio silence. Because for Carney, time was not the enemy, it was the weapon. Each delay eroded America's leverage. Supply chains trembled, CEOs panicked, investors hedged, and the Oval Office, it was sweating bullets. On July 17th, Carney broke his sigh. "Lence not with fire, but with calm. Deadlines are for the desperate," he said. "We negotiate on structure, not on ultimatums." His words rippled through global boardrooms and diplomatic halls. And then came the shocker, a joint letter from over 80 U.S. CEOs, including the heads of GM Alcoa and Tyson Foods, pleading with Trump to delay the tariffs, citing irreparable strategic harm to American industry. But Ottawa did not gloat. Instead, it pressed forward advancing trade deals with ASEAN, the EU, and Japan, while locking in legal protections for dairy and green steel. The world took notice. In Berlin, negotiators referenced Canada's dairy model. In Tokyo, ministers cited Canada's $6.5 billion protection fund. In Brazil, lawmakers introduced legislation inspired by Ottawa's supply management fortress. Dr. Nora Sayed of the WTO Policy Institute put it bluntly, "We may be witnessing the birth of a global strategy not to reject U.S. leadership, but to build frameworks that can outlast its volatility, because this was never just about tariffs. It was about trust, predictability, and whether Washington still offers either." In the end, Trump wanted obedience. What he got was resistance, calm, legal, and lethal. He sought to dominate. But Carney did not fight the war. He made it unwinnable. And as the July deadline faded and the tariff sword hung in midair, one truth became impossible to ignore. While Trump played firebrand, Carney played chess. Now middle-class families across America are left to wonder who really won. Was this about protecting American jobs or playing political brinkmanship on the backs of workers and consumers? Did Trump miscalculate the cost of economic nationalism in a globally entangled world? And the most haunting question of all, has Canada just written the playbook for surviving the post-American trade order? Let us know what you think in the comments below.